Dates for the presentations is in the first slide. So the first week slides, all the dates are there. Anything else? Okay, so I have made I have arranged properly that all of you guys have received papers which you have given in your preferences. So I've tried to make sure that get the best paper, but it is possible that you may have got papers a little bit low in your preference, but I guess it's still okay because it was in your top 10 list. So I guess you must have read the abstract at least and probably found the paper interesting, and it will be a fun exercise for you to work on it for the next 4 or 5 weeks. So after you after you're through with the presentation, then you can start working on the report. And yeah, and you can and all the LaTeX, I mean the the templates for the LaTeX templates for where you can write the report, it's also made available in the Moodle. And you will also find some demo previous years reports which you can use as a you can use them for looking into what type of reports you need to write. And the slide templates are also in Moodle, so you can download the slide templates from Moodle and you can start using that while you are making the presentation. So a little bit of information about the presentation. So the time limit is 10 minutes for the presentation. So you can make like 8 to 10 slides. It will be 10 plus 5, 10 minutes presentation and 5 minutes questions. And I would request you to keep the time in mind while preparing the presentation, because we need to accommodate all of the participants for this course properly so that everyone gets an even amount of time. Okay, so with that said, let's get started with today's discussion. So today what we will talk about is distributed representations. So first, let's start with the definitions. So distributed representations is basically a concept in semantic theory, which is a subfield of linguistics, and it deals with the study of meaning in natural language. And the idea can be summarized in this single line. So this line is, actually this quote is made by a famous linguist, John Rupert Frith. So the quote is, "A word is characterized by the company it keeps." So what it means is that if you have two words, these two words are most of the time similar if they are surrounded by words of similar context, which means, let's give an example of that to make it a little bit more clearer. Let's assume that you have this sentence, "The boy ate some shukto in the restaurant." So I'm sure most of you would not know what the meaning of this word is, but just by looking at this sentence, you will notice that there are some words that are familiar to you, like restaurant, ate. So based on these words that are present in the context or in the neighborhood of this target word, which you are not familiar with, you can understand that this word is perhaps a kind of a dish, a kind of a food item, right? So this word can be these words can be converted or can be replaced with a word like hamburger, and the sentence will still be meaningful. So that is the intuition behind this distributional hypothesis idea. And this has been used in natural language processing to actually convert these words into embeddings in space, where in that particular space, similar words are close in space while distant words are far in space. So basically what you're trying to do is that you take a word and then you translate it into some space, and this space can be three-dimensional, n-dimensional, lot, like it is, that is arbitrary. You take this word and then translate it to a space. In that space, this constraint is maintained, that words that are of that have similar neighborhoods or similar contexts are closed in space, which means food items will be closed in space. Let's say capitals of countries will be closed in space. This kind of constraint. So that is what will be maintained when this word will be translated into that space. So as an example, this is the two-dimensional space, that it's kind of a toy space that has been given for illustration purposes. So you can see that this space has the dimensions mean temperature and hardness. So you have cold to hot and soft to hard. And you will see that these words that are of similar meaning and of similar characteristics are closed in space, that is magma and sun. And words like moon and ice, they are also closed in space, which have similar characteristics. So this is just a toy example for illustrations, and ideally you will deal with n-dimensional space, and in most of the cases you will not even know what these dimensions mean. So here I am showing what these dimensions mean, but most of the time you will not know what these dimensions mean. You will just have some dimensions in space, but this particular constraint will be satisfied, that similar words will be close in that space and distant words will be farther in space. Now the question is that how to like learn this representation for the word, that how to learn this low dimensional vector representation for the word, which embeds it in that space, right? So this is done using a technique called word vector. This is actually done using using several set of techniques, and one of them is called word2vec, which is quite popular. I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with the term word2vec. So how many of you guys have heard of word2vec? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, interesting. So yeah, so word2vec is basically a technique of taking a word and then learning a 300 dimensional representation for that particular word. And how it is done? So initially, every word is randomly initialized by a vector. So this vector, every word is randomly initialized. And then what you do is that you define a neural network, and the task of that neural network is to take a word and then predict the other words that are in the context of that particular target word. So you have a target word, let's say the word hamburger, and you are trying to predict other words that are in the neighborhood of that word, like restaurant, ate, these kind of things. And if you do it, and if you define your neural network properly and train it properly, at the end of the time, what will you have is this particular space where similar words are close in space and distant words are farther in space. And you can understand that this is actually an unsupervised training technique, because you have just taken sentence and then created a data out of it. There is no person who is like sitting down and labeling the sentence. There is no annotation labels for the sentences. It's just the data is automatically generated. By taking any sentence, you can automatically generate this data, and then you can learn your neural network from this data. So that is the interesting thing of this technique, and that is why this technique is so popular. Now, before I go into the details of this technique, some basics about neural networks. I hope you guys have gone through the initial material on neural networks, but even if you have not, just to give you some brief idea about what neural network does and what its objective is. So neural network is basically a model or a black box, you can say, that takes in a vector as input, and it outputs also a vector or a scalar or or a metric. So there can be various kinds of input and output mechanisms for a neural network. But most of the time, it takes in a vector. Let's say the vector is represented by this x1, x2, x3, and then what happens is that it goes through this particular network, and and the result is a particular vector, which is a scalar or a vector. It can be anything. So as an example, it can take in as input a text and then predict the sentiment of the text. So in that case, the text will be represented by a vector, and then the output will be the sentiment of that sentence, that is positive or negative, 1 or 0. Or it can take as input a document, and then it can output a classification of the document, that is whether it's an article about sports or politics or entertainment and stuff. So this is how this particular model, this is what the objective of this model is. And how it does is by training a set of weights and biases. So this particular model will have a set of weights denoted here by W and bias B, and it will pass through this function, which is like W, which is the combination of the weight and the input plus the bias, and then it passes through an activation unit. So activation unit is a nonlinear function which acts on top of this combination. So this nonlinear function here is actually called a sigmoid function, and there are various kinds of nonlinear functions out there, like tanh, ReLU. These are all various kinds of nonlinear functions. So once this function is applied, you will get this output. So here, this sigmoid function, what it does is that it takes it converts an input in from real to anything between 0 and 1. So it takes a real number and then converts it into 0 and 1. And then you can use this output, and you can, if that output is close to your gold standard output, that is, let's say, positive or negative sentiment. If it is not, then you can update your weights and make it as close to possible as your target output. So this technique is what neural network does, and this is what a single layer neural network looks like. So yeah, I mean, right now, most of the things that we use are not single layer neural networks. We use multi-layer neural networks or deep neural networks. So this multi-layer neural networks, this is an example of a deep multi-layer neural networks or a feed-forward neural network. It will have multiple layers. Your input, which is x1, x2, x3, up to 1. This 1 is basically for just the bias. So this input will go through multiple layers of this neural network, which means that this input will go through multiple transformations as it gets interact with these different weights in this particular network. And then what you will arrive at is an output. And this output will be again a vector or a scalar. And if that output is close to what you actually want it to be, then you will get, then the weights will not be updated that much. But if its output is very far from what you want it to be, then these weights need to be updated to compensate for this like discrepancy between the actual output and the obtained output. So that is what the process of a neural network actually does. And yeah, so basically all these hidden layers actually you can say that why use all these hidden layers. So you can actually use a single layer to like mimic a function. Why use multiple layers? So the problem is that if you just take a simple example like the XOR, like you must have been familiar with the XOR function. The XOR function is a Boolean function that takes 0, 0 and the output is 0. And if it is 0, 1, the output is 1. So it's a Boolean function. If you try to build a neural network that tries to generate the output of a XOR function, you will find that a single layer neural network is not good enough. So you will see that if you try to do it in your free time, it's a fun exercise I would encourage you to do. If you do it, you will see that a single layer neural network is not good enough. You need a hidden layer to actually complete this particular task. And it has been shown mathematically also that a one hidden layer neural network is actually a universal approximator. That is, it can approximate with some amount of error any function that is out there. But it may not be practical to use a single layer hidden network. So because it may not be efficient to train it, so generally we use multiple layers in your network. So that is why it is called deep neural networks. Because if you have multiple layers and you have a lot of data, then you can train it quite efficiently. So, and also all the inputs are represented in terms of matrices. So basically here I have shown just one input, but technically this you can have several data points in your training data. So if you have 100 data points, then you will have 100 into 4 as your matrix of inputs, which need to be passed through this particular neural network, right? So it will be like a series of data points that pass through this neural network at once, and then it will give you the output. And what you will need to do is that you need to like train your weights so that for all these data points, the output matches what you actually were the goal data show, actually what the goal data has. So for all the data points in your batch or in your on your training data, you want them to have the actual output that the training data have. And if it doesn't have, then you need to update the weights. So that is like the process that a neural network generally follows. And this is like one of the activation functions that you sometimes use, a tanh activation function. So the difference between a sigmoid and a tanh is that a sigmoid, what it does is that you feed it a real number and it will convert it between 0 and 1. And if you feed a real number to a tanh, it will convert it in between -1 and +1. So it has a higher expressivism. So you can express more richer functions using a tanh activation function. So this is used a lot in various real world systems that use neural networks. And finally, what you also use is a softmax function. So basically, your output is in the form of a vector, right? So if you are doing a, let's say, a multi-class classification task where you have, let's say, 3 classes. Let's say your classes are document categories. Let's say your categories are politics, sports, and entertainment. In that case, your output is a 3 into 1 column vector, right? So if it's a 3 into 1 column vector, you want to convert it in the form of a probability. So given a 3 into 1 column vector, what you want is to convert it in the form of probability, and you will pick the unit that has the highest probability. So that is your target class. So to do that, you use this function called softmax. So basically what you do is that this particular function is just a normalization, and this normalization is done by exponentiating it first and then normalizing by the sum of all the entries that are present in your column vector. So if you have a column vector of 3 into 1, then this will be a summation of 3 values, and you will have one of them in the top. So that is like a way of converting your column vector in terms of probabilities, where all the entries will now sum to 1. And what you will do is that you will pick the unit or pick the entry in your column vector which has the highest probability as your predicted class for this particular data point. So that is like the process that basically is used in a classification task in your neural network. And yeah, and I hope you have already gone through the mandatory lecture video. And if I would also request you to go through the optional videos, because it will give you a little bit more grasp about the optimization process or the learning process or the training process that this particular model goes through. And you of course you know that right now several of the real world applications that are powering AI are actually built on top of neural networks. So this is actually a interesting topic to get a good idea about. Okay, so if you have any specific questions about neural networks, you can ask me. Otherwise, I will continue. Okay, if there are no such questions, so I can just start with the next part. So basically, the I will just discuss about how word-to-vec approach works. That is, how does word-to-vec approach is used to obtain representations for words, and then I will follow it up with how word-to-vec can be extended to obtain representations for documents. So first, how word-to-vec works, how can we use word-to-vec to obtain representation for words, and then how to extend this technique for obtaining representations for documents. So word2vec has two particular ways of doing representation for words. One of them is skipgram and the other is CBOW. So let's talk about skipgram first. So let's see that you have a sentence here. A man is riding a bicycle, right? So what you do is that you pick one of the words as a target word. Here the target word is A, and what you do is that you use this target word to predict the other context words like begin and man. So begin here is a meta token, so it is not a word, but man is a word. So basically it has to predict that A is the beginning word, and then its surrounding word is man. Then you go to the next target word, man. So here the context word is A and is. So using man, you are trying to predict the surrounding word A and is. So this is how the setup is. So you have a target word, and using that you are predicting the context words. So this particular approach is called skipgram. And there is another approach called CBOW. So in CBOW, what you are doing is that uh, given the context words, you are trying to predict the target word, which is like the opposite of this. So yeah, so here as an example, same procedure every year. These are the context words, and you are predicting the target word. And in skipgram, you are doing the opposite. As I've said, you are predicting the context words based on this target word. So these are like the overview of the architecture that CBOW and skipgram actually uses. So you have your inputs. These inputs are actually one-hot encoded inputs. I hope you guys know what one-hot encoding means. So basically, let's say you have 5 words, right? Let's say you have 5 words. Then you have a vector of length 5, and you make the first position as 1 if you are indicating the first word, and then you make the second position as 1 if you're indicating the second word. So it's basically every vector will have one entry as 1, which will indicate the word that it represents, and everything other will be 0. So that is what one-hot encoding means. So first what will we do is that you will take the words and compute one-hot encoding for these words. Then you will pass these words through a neural network, which is the encoder. This neural network is called encoder. What this encoder will do is that it will take this one-hot vector and convert it into a dense vector. So if you understand the problem with one-hot vector, right? So if you do a one-hot vector, then your vector size is like how many words that are in your vocabulary. So typically we can have millions and like at least hundreds and thousands to millions of words. So then you need to represent every word as a million vector, million dimension vector, which is very like which will waste a lot of space, and this will lead to the same problem that we have seen previously in case of binary encoding. I think we have seen previously while discussing TF-IDF. So what you will do is that you will take the one-hot vector for the word, pass it through an encoder, and this encoder will convert this million cross one column vector into a dense vector. This dense vector could be of 512 dimensions or 300 dimensions. So once you have this dense representation for the word, you will sum them up You will sum them up to form the average of those dimensions. This will be a single vector, and then you will use it to predict the target word, which is the missing word, right? So that is what CBOW generally follows. And skipgram follows obviously the opposite. You have the input word, which is again the one-hot vector. You convert it into, you pass it through an encoder to get your dense representation, and then use it to predict the context words. So that is like the architecture that these two methods generally follow. So yeah, so as I have explained, so you have the one-hot vectors, you pass it through the encoder and do the sum, and then convert it and then predict the output or the target words. And yeah, so the interesting thing is that this encoder, which is like the neural network, which takes is and input a word and converts it into a representation. So the weights of this encoder is shared by all these words. So the weight of this particular encoder is basically shared by all these words that you will feed as one-hot vector. So ultimately, what you will arrive is actually an embedding for each of these words. So in this particular example, the word queen, woman, girl, boy, man, these are all represented in the form of embedding, as a form of embedding, where the colors indicate high value in each of the positions of the embedding. Now, a very interesting thing that a lot of people have discovered is that if you take the embedding of the word queen, subtract the representation for woman, and add the representation of man, then you will arrive at the representation of king. So this is very intuitive. You take queen, subtract woman plus man, and you will get the representation for king. So this is a very interesting constraint that a lot of people have seen, and basically this has been utilized in various real world applications. So yeah, so this is like how word embeddings work and how you can use it to get vector representation for words. Now the question is that how to extend it for documents. So you right now you just have vector representation for words. How to extend it for documents? So one of the very highly cited works that I will discuss today. So what it does is that it takes the same approach as Word2Vec and adds a small modification on top of Word2Vec. So given a particular document, most of the time the document will be broken into paragraphs, right? So document will have paragraphs, various number of paragraphs in a document. So what they do is that they will first tokenize the document in terms of paragraphs, and then they will have a single one-hot representation for a paragraph. So every paragraph will have a separate one-hot representation. And as you know, every word also has a one-hot representation. So now what they do is that you will take a paragraph, enter all the words or enter some of the words of this paragraph and the paragraph itself, and pass it through the encoding process and try to predict one missing word in this paragraph. So they will have a target word, they will remove the target word, have some context words surrounding that target word, use those context words as well as the paragraph one-hot encoding, and use that to predict the target word that has been missing. So they will have separate separate encoding for the paragraph and shared encoding for the words, which is separate. And then they will use it to predict the missing word. And this is also, as you can see, an unsupervised way of training, because you can do it for any document. And if you do it and if you just update it for some number of epochs, what you will obtain is unique low dimensional representations for all of these paragraphs. Now, when you have low dimensional representations for all of these paragraphs, you can concat those representations together, and that is like a single representation for your document. So what you have done is quite interesting. What you have done is that you have extended Word2Vec to represent, to obtain a single representation of your entire document. And then you can use it for various kind of interesting approaches like article prediction, these kind of classification tasks you can actually approach using this technique. And if you, this technique is called Doc2Vec, and I think this approach was uh, published by Google, and it has quite a number of citations. So you can see how simple this particular approach is and how effective it is to obtain representation for documents. And yeah, so the important part of this document representation are that initially in case of word embeddings, you will see that what we want is strong, powerful, to be closer, and Paris, Delhi, they need to be closer, but there need to be distance between them. But in case of sentences also, this constraint is satisfied by this particular approach. So sentences that talk about similar sentences that mean similar things will be close in space, while sentences that mean very different things will be distant in space. So the meaning of the sentences is preserved to some extent by this approach. Where in case where you have not used this approach and you have just taken the word embeddings and then just concatenated together to give you sentence or document representations, then the word order information is completely lost. So basically, it will not have any information that this word generally comes after this word. So this information will be lost, which is kind of preserved in this particular approach. And yeah, and this was proposed by Mikolov et al. In 2014. So actually, some of the people have done a very nice visualization using this technique. So they have taken all the documents from English Wikipedia and obtained representations for those documents, and using this Doc2Vec technique, and then they have visualized this representation using a approach called TSNE. So this particular approach, what it does is that it takes the representation and then converts it into a 2D map. So you can see that similar articles like areas of computer science, athletic sports, species, albums, films, they are kind of close in space. So it kind of maintains this constraint that similar documents will be close in space. This is kind of maintained in this particular approach. So that is what I have to say about Doc2Vec. And yeah, if you have any specific questions, you can just ask me now. Okay, so if there are no questions, I will move on to the next topic. So can you guys see the new slides? Okay, so I think we have some questions. So let me just see them. Do we have individual tutors? So what do you mean by individual tutor? I'm not very sure what you mean by this. You can probably ask me. What about then comparing documents with different number of paragraphs? Yeah, so that is an interesting question. So two documents can have multiple paragraphs also. So what you can do is that if there are two documents that have like different kinds of paragraphs, then the embedding length will be different, obviously. So what you can do is that you can pass them through another dense layer or another neural network to make them uniform. So basically, once you have, let's say one document has 3 paragraph and another has, let's say 5, then what you can do is that you can pass it through a single dense layer to obtain one representation. Or what you can do is that you can average those paragraphs together to obtain one single representation. So what you need to do, you need to add a summarization layer on top of the paragraphs that you obtained to give you one single representation for the document. I hope that clears your question. Yeah, actually network does depend on number of paragraphs, but technically what you obtained is, what you need to obtain is one single representation for the document. But as you can see that what can actually happen is that if there are some documents which has very less number of paragraphs, then the representation will not be as rich. But if there are multiple paragraphs in your documents, then the representation will be richer. That is what this the relation will be between number of paragraphs and the quality of the representation. Okay, I hope the answer is okay, and I can just move on to the next topic. So the next topic that we will talk about is language modeling. So yeah, this is one of the fundamental tasks in natural language processing. And yeah, let me just have a survey. How many of you guys are familiar with or even heard of language modeling? Can I see a thumbs up or raise of hands? No one has heard about language modeling. That's weird. Some of you have gone through the deep learning for web course, right? Okay, so let's start from the basics then. So the task in language modeling is actually to take a sequence of words and then predict the next word. So take a sentence, and then not a sentence but a sequence of words in the sentence, and then predict the most likely word that can come after the words that you've taken. So as an example, let's say your sequence of text is the students open their. So this is like your series of text that you have taken. So the next word can be books, laptops, exams, mind. So these are like the probable words that can come after this series of words. But probably some word like, let's say, Darmstadt is not likely after this series of words. So this is like the most probable words, and this is computed out of all the words that can come. So the number of words is your entire vocabulary. So now you are trying to find out among all the words in your vocabulary, what is the most likely word that can come after this series of words. So how to express it more formally? So it is actually expressed in form of a conditional probability distribution. So you are trying to estimate the probability of of every word out of all the words that are in a vocabulary, the probability that xt plus 1, which is this position, the probability that xt plus 1 is equal to books, given that all these words have come before this xt plus 1 word. So you need to calculate this probability xt plus 1 for all the words that are present in your vocabulary. So you will have xt plus 1 is equal to book something, xt plus 1 is equal to laptop something, xt plus 1 is equal to Darmstadt something. So that is what language modeling actually the objective is. That is what you need to compute when you are estimating a language model. Now, how it is practically done. So basically, you actually have a series of text. You actually have a corpus where you have series of words that are present in this particular corpus. So you need to compute the probability that your corpus has the word x1. So actually the joint distribution from x1 to xt, it can be broken up into all these conditional distributions. So from your corpus, you need to compute what is the probability of x1. So let's say x1 is equal to the, and then you need to compute what is the probability of x2, where the first word is the, that is, let's say, the students. So students given the. Then you will have other words, let's say x3 given x1 and x2, that is the probability that x3 is equal to opened, given the first two words are the students. So that is what you are actually computing from your corpus. And then when you sum them up to, or when you multiply them up together, what you obtain is the joint distribution of that particular series of text, that is the students open their book, this series of text. So what you are doing is that you're breaking them up into individual units, and then using the conditional distribution probability to multiply them up together to get the joint distribution. So that is what language model actually gives you. It gives you the probability of this sequence. How likely can you find this sequence in your corpus? So language models are actually everywhere. So you will find it in keypad suggestions. So in your keypad suggestions, you will find that it will predict what is the most likely word after you write something. You will also find it in smart replies in Gmail. So basically, I'm sure many of you have seen that Gmail provides replies to automatic replies to mails. So what it does is that it reads the entire mail that you have written, and then gives you a conditional probability distribution that what is the most likely, let's say, 3-word sequence that can come after that particular mail. So that is it uses a very high performance language model for doing this. And also you can find it in auto suggestions in case of when you are searching, you will find auto suggestions. That is also an example of language models. Now, basically, how do these particular what is the way to estimate these probabilities? So this is actually done by learning an n-gram language model. So an n-gram language model is actually, so an n-gram is nothing but n consecutive words. So it can be like a 1 gram or a unigram, where single words like the students open. So these are unigrams, single words. Then you have bigrams, where you have 2 words like the students opened there. So these are like 2 words together. Then you can have trigrams, where you can have 3 words together, students opened there, 4 grams, and so on. So this is what an n-gram means. And what you are doing is that you need to collect statistics of this n-grams in your data. That is, how many times the appears. I mean, out of all the words, the probability of the students. These are some of the things that you need to estimate from your corpus, that is from your text documents. So using this particular statistics of these unigrams or of these n-grams, what you are trying to calculate is the probability of of this xt plus 1, that is the next word in your sequence, based on the previous words, right? And this is actually, if you try to do it like in a naive way, this will be a very complex task, because in that case, the tth word, the t plus 1th word needs to include all the words that comes before t plus 1. But that will be a huge series of words. So what people do is that they use Markov's assumption, where the probability of this particular word t plus 1 will only depend on n minus words that come before it, not all the words. So basically it will only consider some fixed number of words that come before it, and ignore all the words of before that window. So this is like a relaxation that people do to make the computation possible. Otherwise, the combination will be quite large. So to solve that, there is a relaxation, and most of the time this is like 5 or something. So how do we use this particular relaxation to obtain the representation? So what they do is that, let's say you want to compute this probability. So what you will do is that you will calculate the count that t plus 1 or t plus 1th word, whatever that word is, that word precedes this sequence, starting from the previous n minus 1 words and the nth word. So you will calculate in your corpus how many times these n words co-occur, or these n words occur in a series, and then divide that by the n minus word sequence. So this is the n sequence, and this is the n minus 1 sequence. So this is like the way of computing this probability. That is what the language model needs to uh, to compute the next word, or the probability of the next word in your sequence. So how does a 4-gram language model then looks like? So basically, if you have selected a 4-gram language model, then what you will have is you will discard all the words that appears after the 4th word in the sequence. So this is the 4th word that you want to predict, and you will ignore all the other words, and then using these 3 words you will try to predict the 4th word, and you will just count all the 4 words in the sequence, and then divide it by the denominator. So that is what is basically done while you are computing the 4-word n-gram language model. So yeah, so as an example, so if let's say you have something like students opened there, and that occurred, let's say 1,000 times, and student opened their books, this is a 4-word, and it occurs 400 times, right? Then the probability that of getting books, given that you have the sequence student open there, will be 400 by 1,000, that is 0.4. On the other hand, if you have this particular sequence, student open their exams, if it occurred 100 times, then the probability of exams given student open there is the sequence that comes before it will be 0.1. So that is how you will compute the probability of words that comes after a sequence. Okay, so I can take any questions that you have. Otherwise, I will move forward. This language models words actually were tokens from the model's vocabulary. So they are basically not formed over individual words. They are actually formed over multiple word sequences. That is, here I have shown like a 4-gram language model. That means a sequence of 4 words, or it can be 3-gram, a sequence of 3 words. So having a unique, like a single word, will most of the time will defeat the purpose of a language model. So basically, you need to have a statistics of some words in the sequence, and then use it to predict the next word. Okay. Yeah, it is done on tokenized words or processed words most of the time. So you take the word, you first you remove the stop, you do lemmatization, you these kind of pre-processing you do, and then you use the final root form of the word. Like, let's say if the word has plural, if you take a plural form of the word, then you remove the s and then use these kind of things. Words or not. I didn't get your question. What do you mean? Can you speak the question? It will be easier in that case.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just wondering whether so I got that this is pre-deep learning and this is an older approach, but I know that some kind of vocabularies are learned over the data so that then the words are deconstructed into some kind of tokens. Are these n-gram language models then formed over these tokens or over entire words? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean that is basically kind of your choice. So you can, let's say you take, instead of n-gram, you take a char gram. That means character engrams, right? So in that case, instead of taking entire words as your grams in your n-grams, you can take characters. Like, let's say in case of exams, then ex will be a token, exa will be a token. So this is how you can also do it. So it's based on how you want to represent the data. So many times we have seen that charactergrams are works better in representing the text instead of words.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So these, as you said, you are right. This is actually a pre-deep learning method, the pre-deep learning era approach. Most of the time, right now, what people do are mostly they do not use n-gram models as much while representing a sentence, or even doing language models. Most of the approaches do not use n-grams right now. But in pre-deep learning era, what they used to do is that uh, for a particular sentence, you obtain the n-grams, and then those n-grams were your features. So let's say you calculate all the n-grams that are present in your data. Let's say your n-gram is 4, then all the 4 grams that are present in your data, then that 4 gram is, then a single 4 gram is a feature. So as an example, if you want to represent this sentence that students open their books in form of a trigram, then it will be student open, there will be a feature, and in your data, this feature, for this feature, your matrix or your vector will have entry as 1, because students open there exists. Then open their books also exists, so that will be also 1 in your trigram. But student their books is not in this sequence, right? So in that case, for that n-gram, it will be 0. So out of all possible n-grams, that is how you will represent this data in case of pre-deep learning error models. And then what you will do is that you will feed this vector through a machine learning model, let's say a support vector machine, or even forget support vector machine, a simple logistic regression model. And then you will predict what this particular sentence, what this sentence actually you want to predict. Let's say you want to do sentiment prediction, then what does this sentence sentiment is. So that is what generally people used to do. Okay, so So yeah, so what are the problems of this particular n-gram model approach? So one of the problem is sparsity. So what do we mean by sparsity? So by sparsity, what we mean is that it is easily possible that some specific n-gram is actually not present in your training data. So let's say in your test data, you want to calculate this particular sequence. Students open their W, where W is a placeholder. Now, in your training data, this particular sequence may not have arrived at all, may not be present at all. So you do not have the probability for this particular sequence. So when you are doing it, your count is 0. That means your probability is 0. So in that case, when you are using this language model, you will calculate W given this sequence as 0 always, which is quite harmful, because then your language model can never generate W. So that is a problem. And to solve the problem, the approach is called smoothing. So what smoothing does is that, what it will do is that it will, every single this kind of tokens will have at least some amount of probability attached to it, so that none of these particular cases come where it is 0. So every word will have some small amount of probability to every word will have some probability associated with it when given a particular sequence. The second problem is sparsity. So basically, as you can see that as you increase your number of n-grams, you increase it to, let's say, 10, 12, 13, this problem increases by a huge margin, because there will be so many combinations of words which will not be present in your data, but you will still need to store them. So that makes a problem of storage. That makes a storage problem apparent in your model, and which also creates issues. So these are some of the issues that comes up, and to solve those issues, like as an example, if you want to use this, that you want to use the student open their W, this particular sequence, then you need to have for high number of n-grams, all of this sequence need to be stored, which makes it quite a complex problem. So let's talk about some of the applications of language model now. So as you can see, language model can easily be used to generate text. So language model can easily be used to create long sequence of texts. So as an example, let's say you have the text today the, then using the language model, you can compute the probability of the next word that can appear after this sequence. And then what you can do, you can apply any of the known sampling methods to sample one of these possibilities. So if you do a sampling, then that sampling process will respect the probabilities that you have already computed. And based on this, you can just pick a word and then replace that word here. So then if you have sampled price here, even if it has low probability, still this word can be sampled, because you are doing a stochastic process. So then it will be today the price. And then you can use today the price as your primer, as your sequence, and then use that to predict the next word. So as an example, you can use today the price. If you are using a 2-gram kind of an approach, then based on the price, you can use what is the next word that can come. Like, let's say here you have sampled off, then it will be today the price off. So that is how language models can be used to generate series of words, and you can go on to do it. And we have seen if we can do it, if you do it again and again in a sequential manner, you can obtain this kind of text, that is today the price of gold per ton while production of shoe lasts and shoe industry. So this is a series of text that looks like it is syntactically okay, but the meaning does not, it does not make any sense when you read this particular particular text. So if you use a 2-gram kind of a n-gram, or among the n-grams, a 2-gram approach, you can generate text. Surely it will be grammatical, there will be some syntax rules that will be followed, like let's say a predicates will be followed by arguments, these kind of things. So you will have the some amount of syntax that will be followed, but the semantics will be lost. So, and if you try to solve this by adding bigger and bigger n-gram models, like let's say 50-gram model, then this problem will come up, that sparsity problem and storage problem, which will make your model almost impossible to implement. So to solve this, there are various approaches to solve this. So one of the family of approaches is recurrent neural networks, which we will discuss today. So these are like kind of the earlier approach for doing this. But before even talking about recurrent neural networks, let's talk about how to solve this using a neural network, how to solve this using a basic neural network, which can to some extent solve some of the problems of n-gram models. So if you want to use a neural network to solve this problem, what you will basically do is that you have your words, let's say the student opened there, and you use your neural network to obtain embeddings or representations for these words, right? So this can be previously computed using techniques like word2vec. So word2vec can give you the representations for the words, right? And then what you can do is that you can feed the words through another neural network, which will combine these particular representations for the individual words. And you can apply a multi-layer, like a feed-forward neural network that we discussed. You can apply some layer of computations, and then you can apply a softmax operation, which will give you probabilities for each of the words. Like as you can see, if you apply a softmax operation, books has the highest probability. And then if you train it for several iterations, then this can be one of the possibilities, that after seeing this sequence of words, you can obtain this softmax probability where books has the highest probability, followed by laptops. So that is how you can use a simple neural network to solve this task. You obtain the embeddings for the words, pass it through several layers of computation, which each of them passes through their individual weight matrices, obtain the final representation, then pass it through a softmax layer, obtain the representation for the entire vocabulary of your corpus. Now, what are the problems that can be solved using this approach? So as you can see that one of the problems is basically this sparsity problem, because now you don't have to store probabilities for all of this n-grams. So you don't have to store the probabilities for all of these combinations, like the students opened there, all of these combinations you don't need to store. You just need to have individual representations for the words, that is obtained by word2vec or similar techniques, and then you can just train the weights to obtain the representations of the next word. So that is like one of the that is like an upgrade that you obtained using this approach, that solved some of the previous issues, but it also has issues of its own. So what are the important issues that can come up? So as you can see that that if you add more and more words, that is, if your context is bigger, then this capacity that you have chosen will need to be improved. So if you have more words, if you need to have more words in your context, then you need to improve your capacity. Then that means you need to add higher and higher layers, or deeper and deeper layers, right? So most of the time this approach works when your window is small, but it can be too small, and that can create a problem, right? The second and more subtle issue is that there is no mixing or there is no sharing between the weights for the words. So as an example, when you are passing this, when you are passing this representations through this feed-forward neural network, what happens is that this DA and students and opened, each of them interact with specific parts of these weights, and then they convert to the final representation. So DA and students are not sharing any weights. So DA students opened, they are also not sharing any weights. So each of them interacts with part of the weight matrices, and then it gets converted to the final probability distribution. So this is a problem in case of text. I mean, this can work in case of any kind of tabular data. If you have, you can use it. You can use this approach to obtain probabilities for your final classes if you have tabular data. But in case of text, this is an issue, because in text, the students is also an entity of its own, right? And most of the time, this a text, the meaning of the text happens through interaction of the words. And if there is no sharing of the weights, then this interaction is not reflected in the final probability distribution, and that makes things worse. So that is like one of the problems that is called no symmetry problem. So that is what comes up when you are using this kind of an approach. So this is what is kind of to some extent solved by an RNN, or a recurrent neural network. So recurrent neural network is actually a family of neural networks that dominated NLP between the time 2013 to like 2018, late 2018. So this is the time period when recurrent neural networks have dominated NLP models, and let's discuss some of the how this particular model works. Let's discuss some of its benefits and some of its problems. So what recurrent neural network does is that, given a particular input X, it has a hidden state, and that hidden state is shared by all the words that are present in your input sequence. So you have a hidden state. Let's say the hidden state is d-dimensional. You add and you give to the model an input x1, and using the computation between x1 and h1, you obtain a particular value y1, right? Then what you do is that you use the same weight while taking the next value, while taking the next word in your sequence. So basically what you're doing is that you're passing a series of words, and each word is getting combined with one of the weight values, and that is giving you an output, and that same weight is again used towards the for computing with the next word. So this particular hidden state is shared by all the words that are present in your sequence. So that is kind of, to some extent, solving the symmetry problem. So basically you are taking xi. So let's say in this particular example, you are doing a token classification task. That is, let's say you are doing a part of speech prediction task or a named entity prediction task. So in that particular case, X da is a determiner. So with da, you will predict that it is determiner. Let's say the next word is next word is children. Then that is a noun. So it will predict noun. So let's say in that case, you have this series of text. The students open there. So with da, it goes through this particular network, and it predicts a y. And let's say it is not determiner. In that case, what will happen is that this weight will get updated, right? Then it will take the students, and then it will predict, let's say, the next value. Let's say the student is noun, so it will predict, let's say, a noun. In that case, the loss is less, so this weight will not get that much updated. And then again you will take the next token in your sequence length. So as an example, so in this particular way, what happens is that this particular, when you have the students opened, then this weight has knowledge to the other words that has come before opened, which was not the case in case of the previous approach. So since there was no sharing between the weights, a particular in this particular state, in this particular time point, this weight has no knowledge of what sequence has come before it. So as an example, so as a result, it will not be able to predict the next word properly because the because the because it has no history, because it has no notion of history in its representation in the previous case. While in this case, since the weight is shared, it has a notion of history while you are passing the series of sequences. So every time point remembers to some extent what has come before it. So that is the innovation that RNNs have proposed, and that's why it dominated for like 4 or 5 years. So, as an example here, just to give you an illustration. So you have the students open there, you take the word the, pass it through a technique like Word2Vec, which will give you representation for the. Then it will pass through this shared layer, which will give you a representation. And then you will, this shared layer will be copied over to the next state. And again, it will be used to give you a new set of representation, which will again used in the next state. So that is how this particular process goes on. And if you look into the computation part, you will see that at any particular time point t, it takes into account the previous state, that is t-1, as well as the current input. So at every time point ht, it takes into account what happened before it, that is ht-1, as well as the current input, that is student, while computing the next state, that is ht+1. So that is how things are getting computed. So at any point t, it takes into account what happened before and the current state, and then it gives you the next state. So that is what a recurrent neural network does. And this process is also sometimes called unrolling, because you are using the same state again and again. So this is called unrolling approach. Okay. So what are the clear advantages of this? So you can see that just theoretically, practically, of course, there are problems, but theoretically it can process a sequence of any length. And basically, without increasing the number of weights, like in the previous case, to have a longer sequence, you need to increase the capacity of the model. But here, theoretically, without improving or increasing the capacity of the model, you can deal with bigger sequence lengths. So that is like some of the interesting things that this model actually provided. But practically, what we see, because as you can see, when you're computing let's say h2, you need to already have compute h0 and h1. Again, when you're computing h3, you need to have compute h1, h2, and h0, h1, and h2. So there is a dependence, because it's a recurrent relation, so there is a dependence. So because of this is very slow. So because of this dependence going on, because this computation depends on what happened before, because there is no way to parallelize this. There is no way to do it in a parallel way, irrespective of the future one. So every single t need to depend on t-1. So that is why this is actually quite slow to implement, and that is why it was eventually this model got replaced by something else. But yeah, you can understand the logic of using this approach. And it also, theoretically, it can process sequence of any length, but what we have seen that it does forget after some point. So as an example here, if you go on adding more sequence, what will happen is that at this particular point, it will only remember, let's say, 3 or 4 tokens before this token, and it will forget everything before that. So that is a problem, because sometime in language you often see long distance connections. So you can see that sometime there is subject verb agreement, and these are like very long distance away. Like there is a one clause where something is mentioned, and that is being connected, let's say 2-3 clause after that. So these long distance dependencies will be lost using this approach. So just to briefly describe about the training process. So basically, as you can see, if you do a like a token classification task, like let's say part of speech prediction, then each of these tokens will pass through this neural network and will give you a prediction, and you will compute the loss for each of them together. So the is a determiner. So if it is not determiner, then there will be a high loss. Similarly, opened is a verb. So if it is not verb, then there will be a high loss. So you will compute all these losses, and then what you will do is that you will sum these losses up together, and then what you will do, you will update the weights such that to minimize this loss, to make this loss lower and lower. So typically what you want to do is to make this loss as low as possible, and if you do that, your model has been trained properly and you can predict accurately. And this process of training a recurrent neural network is called backpropagation through time. So because there is a temporal aspect in your model, so this is a different approach for backpropagation. So I hope you have heard about backpropagation for learning neural networks. So the traditional backpropagation does not work in case of recurrent neural networks. So they had to define a new type of backpropagation called backpropagation through time. And if you want to know the details of this, you can look into Andrew Ng's course in Coursera. So this is quite interesting, and you can, if you look into it, you can understand some of the challenges that this particular backpropagation through time approach has, and how they kind of solve those challenges. So generating sentences through this particular approach is also kind of similar. So let's say you pass your sequencer tokens, and then you obtain a particular vector, and then use that to obtain the probability distribution, and then sample from that. So it's similar to n-gram models. So you take the sequence, obtain the representations, pass it through a softmax, and then use the softmax for sampling. What is the next word? So one of the cool things about RNNs or RNN-based language models is that you can generate nice text using this approach. So you can generate text of various styles. So as an example, this is a text that has been trained on Obama speeches. So once you train the model on this Obama speeches, it can generate quite nice political kind of texts. And yeah, if you read it, you will see that to some extent the semantics is way better compared to the naive n-gram model. So that is like one of the benefits that you get using RNNs. And also you can like train this model on any book corpus. Let's say you train it on all the books of Harry Potter, and then you can generate text that are very similar to the actual text in Harry Potter, although written by a model or written by a stochastic language model. And also you can train it on, let's say you train it on recipes, you can generate new recipes, although obviously may not work, but still you can mimic the template of generating recipes. So that is like some of the people have used these kind of models towards this nice applications, and you can also check them out. So yeah, so some of the takeaways from RNNs are, so basically they are kind of improvement over the basic neural network approach. And basically, if you look at some of the papers using RNNs, you can see that people have used RNN models for various kind of tasks, which include machine translation, summarization, reading comprehension. I won't say that it has provided you the state-of-the-art results, but at that point of time, the result was quite interesting, and it was quite applicable in various kind of tasks. And yeah, so theoretically, it can take into account any length, and you are actually applying the same weight again and again. But as I have said, the problem comes when you are having long text because it forgets previous text, and that creates problems in case of uh, capturing long range dependencies, right? So yeah, right now, actually, this kind of RNN models has been removed, and not removed, I will say, but to some extent, the RNN models has been replaced by something called the transformer architecture. So basically, this particular architecture has kind of replaced RNNs in various kind of real world NLP tasks, and you can see that these models are actually contain billions of parameters. RNNs had way less number of parameters, so these models have billions of parameters. So the actually one of the most popular models that has been created by OpenAI, it has 175 billion parameters. And just 2 weeks ago, there has been a model that has been come up from combined effort of Microsoft and NVIDIA. So Microsoft and NVIDIA have come up with this model called Megatron NLG, Megatron Turing NLG actually, and you can find this model in this link. And this particular model has 550 billion parameters. So you can understand how big this model is and how much data it has been trained on. So this is like some of the things that are going on in very currently training large and large language models, and there are various fun applications. So you can see some of the some of the news coverage has going on language models. So there is a news article from New York Times that says that AI can now write complex computer code. You must have heard of GPT. There is something called Copilot in GitHub. So there is a application called GitHub Copilot, which actually can write code based on the function name. So which is quite interesting. And also there are some fun applications where there has been a college student recently who used GPT-3 to write fake blogs, and that blog became #1 in Hacker News. So yeah, so there are various kinds of interesting ways of using language models towards various tasks. So you can check them out in these articles. So today, the final thing that I will do is there is a class quiz. So this is just a fun class quiz. So I will request you to go to this particular link, or go to this link and then use this code. So yeah, so please go to this link. So the quiz is quite simple. So actually, I have generated two paragraphs, one written by human and one written by GPT-3. So these are these are kind of like science fiction. These are both similar to science fiction articles. So one is written by GPT-3 and one is written by human. So what you need to do is that you need to predict that which is written by human and which is written by uh, uh, so you just predict whether it is written, which one is written by GPT-3. Can you figure it out? So these are the two texts. So just try to figure it out which one is written by GPT-3, and I will and this is for me to know whether you can figure out which one is the machine written code, machine written text. So please look at this text closely and try to figure it out which one is written by GPT-3. So I will give you like 5 minutes, five to 6 minutes, and you can just submit your answers in the portal. I hope everyone is at the link. So this is the link. You can just copy it and then go to your browser. It will open up the portal to submit your prediction. So just predict the transformer, whichever you think is written by the transformer. So there has been a lot of talk that these language models have reached human level capabilities or something like that. So this will be like a survey to know whether that is true or not. So I will wait for 1 more minute before I disclose the results. Okay, I hope all of you guys have posted your answers. So if you want me to wait for a minute or so, you can just raise your hands up. Give me a raise of hands. Otherwise, I will just disclose the quiz results. Okay, interesting. So 50% of you have said it is of A is written by a transformer, and 50% of you have said that B is written by a transformer. So actually the article B is written by the transformer. So 50% you have not been able to predict the human one. So it means that these big companies are onto something. So these language models do work quite well. Okay, that's a good note. So we will stop here. In the next and final class, what we will do is we will go through transform model, and talk about BERT. So yeah, you I repeat, you have the papers have already been allocated, so you guys can already start working on the papers. And yeah, so I stop the class here today. If you have any questions, you can ask me right now. Actually, that will be announced soon. I mean, right now the order has not yet been decided on how to organize the presentations. No, actually, all same day will not happen. It will be broken into 2 or 3 days, possibly 2 days, because one day it's not possible, I guess. But we have to do it in 2 days. Okay, if there are any further questions, I will stop the class. So thank you all for joining. So meet you in the next class. Bye.